There's a certain kind of silence that only happens in a bowling alley parking lot at 2:15 in the morning. It's not peace, and it's not calm. More like the quiet judgment of flickering neon and stale nacho cheese. I wasn't supposed to be there. I was supposed to be in bed next to my wife, who by all indications of our mutual calendar and unwritten social contract, was also supposed to be home. But let's not rush ahead. Stephanie and I had been married for 7 years, which, if you do the math, is exactly 2 years longer than it takes most people to realize they married someone with absolutely no intention of using a turn signal or ever picking a place to eat. Love, right? We met at a backyard fundraiser for a guy running for city treasurer, a man who, to this day, I'm convinced was laundering money through gourmet lemonade stands. Stephanie was volunteering, passing out pamphlets with all the enthusiasm of a DMV clerk on her second decade. Me? I was just trying to find the restroom and ended up with a cup of cucumber mint punch and a girlfriend. Now, Stephanie isn't what you'd call typical. No mystery cologne on her collar. No lipstick-stained receipts in her purse. No suspiciously late nights where she'd come home humming unfamiliar love songs. In fact, she was almost aggressively ordinary. So ordinary, in fact, that I started to think I was the problem. Like maybe I'd watched too many detective shows or read too many Reddit threads about guys getting blindsided by their wives suddenly becoming amateur pole dancers named Velvet. But then came the scavenger hunt. That's right, a scavenger hunt. The kind with handwritten clues, little riddles, and a prize at the end. Except this wasn't meant for me. I discovered it by complete accident when I was cleaning out the junk drawer in our kitchen, a drawer that had, over the years, swallowed everything from car keys to a single child's shoe, and we don't have children, so that one still puzzles me. Tucked beneath a pile of expired coupons and a rogue pair of 3D movie glasses was an envelope marked, in her handwriting, clue number 3, the place where everything goes in circles. Now, I'm not a genius, but I can recognize a metaphor when it punches me in the ego. I opened it and found a printed map. Yes, an actual printed MapQuest map, highlighted in pink and leading to the old Eastview bowling lanes. I stared at it for a while, thought about asking her, thought about shrugging it off. Then I thought about how she had claimed last Friday night was book club, and how, when I asked what book, she said, oh, you know, the usual, pagey one. Pagey one. Stephanie, who organized her bookshelf alphabetically and by color. So I went. And there it was, clue number 4, taped to the back of Lane 12's ball return, written in the same handwriting, folded with surgical precision. You're getting warmer, it read. Next stop, where our story began. I stood there, in my slightly too short pajama pants and faded college sweatshirt, in the middle of a dark bowling alley with disco lights flashing overhead, wondering if I had just stepped into a Nicholas Sparks novel written by someone who drank too much NyQuil. The guy working the counter looked like he'd been surviving on energy drinks and questionable decisions. He nodded at me like we were in on the same secret. She already left, he said, without me even asking. You just missed her. You her husband or her brother? Depends, I said. Is there a third option that involves an awkward emotional spiral? He laughed and pointed toward the exit. She left with a guy in a Make Pickles Great Again hoodie. Now, I may not be an expert in fashion or infidelity, but I am confident that any man wearing a garment like that is not taking your wife to Bible study. So I did what any respectable, confused, rapidly aging husband would do. I went home, poured myself a glass of the store-brand bourbon I keep for emotional emergencies, and sat in the garage like a man who'd just realized he was in the subplot of a movie he didn't audition for. Over the next few days, I pretended like I didn't know. Not because I'm some master of emotional self-control, but because I wanted to see just how far Stephanie would go. Every night, she came home with a new story. Yoga ran late. Traffic was bad. Cheryl had a meltdown at the PDA. We're not in the PDA, mind you, nor do we have kids. She once told me she had to help a friend move a couch that emotionally represented her divorce. I nodded like this made perfect sense. I even offered to lend her my emotional moving straps. The scavenger hunt continued. I found clue after clue, each one more theatrical than the last. One was hidden inside an empty cereal box labeled, "Only for Champions." Another was taped under the ironing board we never used, irony, noted. I began collecting them like some sad Indiana Jones of domestic betrayal. And then came the final clue. It was delivered in a fortune cookie. I kid you not. Stephanie came home with Chinese takeout one night, which she usually avoids because MSG disrupts her aura. And in my cookie was a tiny scroll that read, "Look where hearts were first confessed." I knew exactly where that was. The public library. Yeah, we were that couple. So I went, of course I did. And there, wedged inside the copy of Pride and Prejudice, was a note. "Timothy, if you're reading this, congratulations. You finally caught up." That was it. No apology. No explanation. Just a congratulatory message from the woman who had turned our marriage into a passive-aggressive escape room. I sat there in the aisle of the fiction section, surrounded by books full of happier endings, and did what any man in my position would do. I laughed. Not bitterly, not sadly, but with the kind of detached amusement that comes when you realize your life has quietly become performance art. Stephanie hadn't just cheated on me. She'd curated it, like an exhibit at a museum of emotional disasters. Every clue, every red herring, was part of a little show she'd put on, not for me, but for herself. Because I think, deep down, she wanted me to find out. She wanted it to be cinematic, memorable, maybe even funny in some sick, ironic way. And maybe she was right. Because the next morning, I wrote her a note of my own. Short and sweet. Plot twist. I'm keeping the house. 3 days after the library stunt, Stephanie acted like she hadn't turned our marriage into a middle school drama club production. She was in the kitchen, casually slicing an avocado like she hadn't planted cryptic love notes all over town with the subtlety of a third-rate magician. The woman was unbothered. Utterly, criminally unbothered. Meanwhile, I was still trying to understand how I ended up in a live-action scavenger hunt where the prize was emotional damage and possibly a guy named Glenn with a novelty sweatshirt collection. To keep the peace, or at least the illusion of it, I didn't mention the final clue, or the one before that, or the weird fact that she'd recently picked up a hobby called urban hiking, which as far as I could tell, just meant wandering around parking garages in expensive athleisure wear and not sweating. A truly mystical practice. Stephanie had started journaling, too, but not normal journaling. No, this was what she called mindstream mapping, which apparently meant she wrote whatever thoughts came to her without judgment, punctuation, or occasionally, the English language. The result looked like a toddler tried to rewrite the Constitution during a sugar crash. She left the notebooks out, like she wanted me to read them. Or maybe she just assumed I'd never bother. She was wrong. That's when I found it. Buried in a spiral-bound notebook between 2 pages of musings about intellectual detoxing and a to-do list that included a line with my future self, was a page titled, all caps, Session with Owen, Thursday night. Owen, a name that had not once entered any of our conversations in the last 7 years. Not a coworker, not a cousin, not a neighbor, just Owen. Underneath the title was a bulleted list. Stephanie loves lists. It's how she schedules her entire personality. This one was no different. Arrive 7:15. Bring affirmation deck. Leave phone in car. Don't stay longer than 3 hours. No expectations. No guilt. It read less like a meeting and more like the minutes from a cult induction ceremony. And let's address the obvious. What kind of grown adult puts no guilt on a checklist unless they're doing something that definitely involves guilt? Naturally, I did what any level-headed husband would do. I took a photo of the page, sent it to myself, and then casually returned the journal to the stack like it hadn't just tried to launch me into a full identity crisis. I didn't confront her. That would have made sense. Instead, I went into full passive data collection mode, like a budget version of the CIA with a Target receipt printer. Stephanie, in her attempt to appear casual, kept going about her week like nothing was happening. She even invited me to a sound bath event on Friday, which turned out to be a woman in yoga pants banging metal bowls while everyone pretended they weren't uncomfortable. I declined, told her I had a thing. She didn't ask what the thing was, probably because she assumed I was going to Home Depot to reconnect with my masculine identity, which she once said was trapped inside drywall and lawn maintenance. Instead, I drove across town to the address scribbled next to the name Owen in another entry she left lying around like a breadcrumb for the world's foolest Hansel. It was an office suite. You know, the kind in those sad commercial parks where insurance agents go to slowly die in cubicles. Suite 204. Relational wellness through movement. Movement. That word again. Stephanie had recently become obsessed with movement. Emotional movement. Spiritual movement. Stuckness, she claimed, was the biggest threat to our marriage. I had assumed she meant our Friday night routines. Apparently, she meant me not being Owen. I didn't go inside. I wasn't ready for that. So I sat in my truck, watched, and waited. I told myself I was collecting context. For what? I didn't know. A memoir? A therapy bill? At exactly 7:13 p.m., Stephanie's car pulled in. She parked, got out, and opened her trunk. Removed her affirmation deck? Yes, it was real, a stack of laminated cards with phrases like, "Your worth is not attached to yesterday's limitations," and a yoga mat. Because apparently cheating is better when your hamstrings are open. She went inside. 3 hours later, she came back out, hair slightly tousled in a way that suggested either spiritual transformation or mild humidity, and drove away like she hadn't just dropped a grenade into the marriage and walked away humming. The next morning, Stephanie was in full post-session glow. She made French press coffee, played a playlist called Awakening Softly, and told me she was thinking about going to a week-long stillness retreat. I nodded, asked if Owen was teaching it. She paused, then smiled like a politician caught in a parking violation and said, "I don't think you'd like him." Which, in Stephanie speak, meant Owen knows things you don't. It was time to go deeper. I called my cousin Brent. He's a tech guy, the kind of person who refers to regular humans as end users and finds joy in explaining why your Wi-Fi is slow. I told him I needed help checking some things. Not spying, just digital clarity, as Stephanie would say. Brent owed me from the time I bailed him out of a speed dating event dressed like a Viking. Long story, zero payoff. So he agreed. 3 days later, Brent sent me a neatly organized folder titled Cross-Referenced Appointment Log and Financial Footprint. Stephanie. The man does not mess around. Turns out, Owen wasn't just a Thursday night movement therapist. He was also the listed owner of a tiny LLC that offered transformational companionship for boundary-conscious adults. No, that's not code for anything. That's exactly what it said. Their Yelp reviews were suspiciously glowing, all from people named things like LONR and Jasper Moonlight. Also turns out Stephanie had been paying for private sessions, not through our joint account, but through a separate credit card she opened last fall. The same fall she told me she was reconnecting with her fiscal independence. Now here's the part where most people would blow up. March into the kitchen, demand answers, knock over a fruit bowl for dramatic effect. Not me. I made a spreadsheet. Yep, a full timeline, color-coded, with receipts, locations, and session titles like Trust Building Through Vulnerable Pacing and Deep Mirror Work with Nonverbal Feedback. I titled it Stephanie's Relational Excavation Adventure. Q1 report. I printed it, highlighted sections, annotated where appropriate. Then I left it on the table. No yelling, no speeches, just the cold, passive-aggressive power of office supplies. That night, she didn't say a word about it, just poured herself a glass of room-temperature almond milk and scrolled through her phone like nothing had happened. Which, of course, meant everything had. Stephanie didn't say a word about the spreadsheet. Not a single syllable. She glanced at it once on the table like it was an overdue utility bill that had wandered into her sight line, then folded her arms, muttered something about how she didn't respond to aggression formatted in columns, and walked away. That was her way of acknowledging it, I guess. Personally, I found that to be a very niche complaint for someone actively booking hour-long trust-building workshops with a man who spells his name with a silent H. But fine. If she didn't want to respond to a spreadsheet, I had more tabs. The confrontation didn't happen in the way people expect. No raised voices, no gasps, no dramatic door slamming, and definitely no slow-motion montage of memories while sad piano music played. It happened in the garage, of all places. The very space she had spent the last 3 years pretending didn't exist unless she needed to complain about the smell of paint thinner or request something sanded in a masculine way. It started when she wandered in looking for a folding table she'd stored behind my pile of unfinished shelving units. I was already out there, halfway through what was supposed to be a routine reorganizing session that had somehow turned into 3 hours of moving the same box of old extension cords from one shelf to another and questioning all my life choices. Stephanie spotted me, paused like she'd caught a raccoon doing taxes, then acted surprised. "Didn't know you were in here," she said. which was objectively hilarious considering the lights were on. The door was open, and I was humming along to a podcast about mid-century hardware store scams. I turned to her, wiping my hands on a rag for no reason other than to buy time, then gestured toward the folding table like we were co-workers negotiating printer usage. It's behind the box labeled Holiday Lighting Debacle. Be careful, it shifts. She nodded, stepped around a bag of old tennis balls. Again, neither of us play tennis, and leaned down to slide the table out. And that's when I said it. Stephanie, how long have you been seeing Owen for therapy, or whatever you're calling it this week? She stopped mid-reach, straightened up slowly. The look on her face was impressive, I'll give her that. A mix of theatrical shock and mild annoyance, like I'd accused her of eating the last granola bar during a juice cleanse. What are you talking about? She asked, and bless her heart, she really did commit to that line. Hands on hips, eyebrows raised, the whole performance. I gestured toward the door. You know, I actually made coffee if you want to do this like civilized people. It's not alphabetized or spiritually filtered, but it's hot. She didn't move, so I kept going. I have a question, I said, wiping my hands again on the same rag, even though it now just redistributed dust. Is Owen part of your new emotional independence thing? Or does he offer, I don't know, extra credit exercises in vulnerability? Stephanie blinked. Once, then twice. You went through my things. No, I said, holding up one finger. I picked up a notebook that was left open on the kitchen counter, directly underneath a sticky note that said, and I quote, Timothy, don't touch my notes. Which, in case you forgot, is an invitation. She looked like she was about to deliver a monologue. Maybe something about boundaries or spiritual contracts. But instead, she asked, do you really not trust me? It was such a perfectly ironic question that I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was like watching someone set a house on fire and then get mad you didn't believe in fireproofing. No, I replied. I trust that you've been booking private sessions with a man who encourages you to explore your relational compass, and that said compass seems to point to a different zip code than our house. Stephanie crossed her arms. You don't understand the work I've been doing. Oh, I do, I said. I've seen the invoices. You've been working very hard. Weekly, sometimes bi-weekly. $175 an hour of movement-based clarity. Tell me, does the movement part require candles, or is that extra? She narrowed her eyes. Are you mocking my growth? No, I'm mocking the fact that your growth seems to have legs, a man bun, and a punch card. There was a long pause. One of those moments where you can almost hear the power balance shifting. She didn't defend herself. She didn't even deny it. Instead, she walked over to the folding table, pulled it out with the grace of someone closing a filing cabinet full of bad decisions, and said, You've always been threatened by anyone who helps me. That one, I admit, landed. I stepped back, leaned against the workbench, and studied her face. Stephanie, you're not getting help. You're outsourcing intimacy. There's a difference. Her mouth opened, probably to deliver a preloaded counterargument with bullet points and possibly a metaphor involving a chrysalis, but she stopped. For the first time in what felt like years, she looked unsure. I didn't think you'd notice, she finally said. That right there. More than the clues, more than the sessions, more than the weird affirmations taped to our bathroom mirror. That was the part that hurt. Not the lie, not the betrayal. The fact that she honestly thought I wouldn't notice. That she believed I had become so dull, so predictable, so safe, that I'd never question why she was disappearing every Thursday with a yoga mat and coming back like she'd just survived an emotional boot camp. You know what's wild? I said. I probably wouldn't have noticed if you'd just left your notebook where it belongs. Inside a drawer labeled private nonsense. But no, you left it out. Like you wanted me to find it. Like this whole thing was some sort of morality scavenger hunt. She didn't answer. So here we are, I said. You, pretending to be confused. Me, pretending to be surprised. Shall we keep going? Or do we call it what it is, a badly directed improv exercise with a budget of $175 an hour? She turned toward the door, then looked back at me. You think this is easy for me? Of course not, I said. Deconstructing your marriage with a man named Owen can't be emotionally convenient. Stephanie stood there for a second, like she might say something real. Honest, even. But then she just shrugged, muttered something about how I wasn't in alignment with her new direction, and left the garage. I stood there for another 10 minutes, looking around at my half-organized tools and wondering if this was what emotional maturity looked like now. An unanswered spreadsheet and a confrontation staged in a garage that still smelled like citrus degreaser. The marriage hadn't ended, not officially, but we both knew something had cracked. And Stephanie, well, she had movement class again next week. I'm not a revenge guy. I don't do schemes. I don't write cryptic notes with Latin phrases or post anonymous letters on neighborhood mailboxes. I pay my taxes on time, I return shopping carts, and I once felt guilty about keeping a pen from the bank. That was who I was, and maybe still am. But after the garage conversation, which was more of a half-hearted performance review than a reckoning, I came to the quiet conclusion that if Stephanie was going to treat our marriage like a part-time internship at a wellness retreat, I was going to give her a real-world consequence. Nothing theatrical, no damage done, just a clear, unmistakable reminder that I wasn't asleep at the wheel. It started with the printer. Stephanie had been writing a blog. Not a real blog, of course. A members-only healing journal experience that she published twice a week for a loyal group of readers she liked to refer to as her rooted souls. These were mostly other people who wore linen without irony and posted cryptic photos of houseplants with captions like, "Still growing despite it all." I hadn't paid attention to it much until I did. Turns out, Stephanie had used our shared desktop computer to format her blog entries. Even more interesting, she left her publishing dashboard logged in. And the content? It wasn't subtle. Her most recent post was titled, "Releasing the Old, My Journey from Suppression to Expansion." I read it 3 times to make sure I wasn't projecting anything. I wasn't. She described her partnership with a grounded masculine guide who held space for her emergence, and the slow unraveling of past commitments that no longer aligned with her body's truth. Translation: Owen. This wasn't just a journal. It was a soft launch announcement that she had emotionally outsourced me and had the nerve to write about it like it was a spring cleanse. So I printed it. All 14 entries. I formatted them like essays, added page numbers, double-spaced, titled the packet, "Collected Works of Emotional Convenience" by Stephanie. I even punched holes in the margins and put them in a bright orange binder I found in the back of the closet labeled 2009 tax documents. That's where the real nostalgia lived. Then, I did what any mild-mannered husband with a petty streak and access to a community theater's worth of dramatic flair would do. I mailed it. Not to Stephanie. No, that would have been too easy. I mailed it to 3 places. First, her co-working space. The one where everyone had job titles like Creative Integration Specialist and Experience Designer. I addressed it to her shared mailbox with a sticky note on the front that read, "Thought your team should see how the creative writing classes are going." Second, I mailed it to her yoga instructor, Rochelle, a woman who once lectured me at a Christmas party for blocking Stephanie's chakras with my left brain rigidity. Rochelle ran a weekly newsletter featuring student transformations. I figured she could use some fresh material. And third, I mailed it to her mother. Stephanie's mother, Judy, is a woman who treats composting as a moral obligation and once cried when I threw away a cracked ceramic soap dish. But she's sharp. And while she's Team Stephanie by default, she has a strict policy against overlap relationships, which is her polite way of saying cheating without upsetting her antique tea set. I highlighted 2 sections in Stephanie's blog packet. One mentioned Owen by name. The other mentioned shared energetic exchanges through embodied presence. Even Judy couldn't spin that one. After the packages were sent, I waited. Not anxiously, not nervously, but the way you wait when you've dropped a coin into a vending machine and just want to see if the bag of chips actually falls. Stephanie didn't find out right away. No immediate storms. No passive-aggressive notes on the fridge. She just kept floating through the house like she'd transcended the need for linear conversation. Then Tuesday came. She walked into the living room, holding her phone, face unreadable. Not angry, not weepy, just that calm, overly neutral tone she used when pretending things weren't unraveling. "So, Rochelle emailed me," she said, sitting down on the arm of the couch like a guidance counselor ready to discuss my behavior. "Yeah," I said, without looking up from the local news I wasn't watching. She said she received a printed version of my posts. Like all of them. "Huh," I said. "Must have been enlightening." Stephanie blinked slowly. "Did you do that?" I shrugged. "I thought your words were powerful. Deserved a wider audience." She didn't respond right away. Just sat there, fingers lightly tapping the phone screen like she was holding back from turning it into a projectile. "I'm not embarrassed by what I wrote," she finally said. "I didn't say you should be," I replied. "I just figured if you're going to write public essays about our marriage and your spiritual boyfriend, the people who know you best should be part of the healing process. Collective transformation and all that." She stood up, pacing now. Not angry, just spun up. "My blog is sacred. It's not for judgment. You weaponized it." I leaned back in my chair, crossed my arms. "No, you published it. I mailed it. There's a difference." She stopped pacing. "What do you want from me?" "Nothing," I said. "I just wanted you to know that I see it. All of it. I'm not in the background, making toast while you rewrite the narrative. You don't get to sneak out of a marriage and expect a round of applause for being authentic." There it was. No yelling, no accusations. Just the calm, annoying, deeply rational version of me that she probably hadn't spoken to in a while. To her credit, she didn't fake tears or stage a retreat to her thinking space, a fold-out chair in the backyard under a wind chime she installed during the equinox. She just stared at me. Then, without another word, she went upstairs. Over the next few days, the mood in the house shifted. Stephanie didn't play her meditation playlists. She stopped journaling in the living room. She even skipped a session with Owen, which I only know because she muttered something about canceling because the energy wasn't clean. Whatever that meant. Judy called me the next night, asked if I was okay, said she received the packet. I said I was fine. She said Stephanie had come over, acted defensive, then quiet, then disappeared into the pantry for 20 minutes. Judy's words, "I've seen squirrels with better exit strategies." By the end of the week, Stephanie started talking less. Not in the silent treatment way. More like someone trying to construct a believable apology without actually saying sorry. One morning she even said, "You've been very composed through all this." I nodded. "Therapy, but the kind you don't pay for by the hour." Stephanie didn't ask what that meant. I think she knew. Stephanie scheduled the conversation like it was a quarterly performance review. I found a sticky note on the bathroom mirror in her handwriting that said, "Let's talk tonight after dinner. I'll make tea." She underlined tea, as if that somehow softened the implication that we were about to verbally disassemble whatever remained of our shared adult life. She did not mention what kind of tea. I assumed it would be one of her usual blends with a name like Courage Bloom or Throat Chakra Comfort. Something that smells like a furniture store and tastes like tree bark with ambition. I didn't cancel. I didn't dodge. I showed up. Same spot where we used to play board games on Sunday nights before she declared Monopoly was inherently capitalist and spiritually stifling. Dining table, dim light, folded napkins, because apparently formality matters when sorting through emotional debris. She sat down across from me with 2 mugs, handed one over. I accepted it like a man receiving a gift card to a store that doesn't exist anymore. The mug had a slogan on it: "Empathy is strength." Probably a clue about how she planned to spend the whole evening. Like we were in a mutual exploration of discomfort, instead of a long-awaited debriefing on how she replaced intimacy with Owen's patented brand of slow-motion lunges and whispered accountability. She exhaled like a drama student warming up. "I want to start by saying this isn't about blame." I nodded. "I figured, since you've already covered that part in 14 blog posts and a meditation circle." Her face twitched, just a little. She wasn't used to me participating in the sarcasm part of our marriage. That had always been her department. "I was in pain," she said, as if I'd interrupted a monologue. "And when people are in pain, they reach for what soothes them. And what soothes you," I replied, "is apparently a bearded man in ethically sourced sandals who charges by the affirmation." "I didn't plan for that to happen," she said, tapping her mug like it owed her support. "I went to Owen for clarity." "Well," I said, "that part's mutual. You went for clarity. I got clarity. Everyone wins." She blinked. "You're doing that thing where you pretend you're unaffected. And you're doing that thing where you think honesty is the same as insight," I said. "But we can keep going. This is fun." She took a breath, the kind she learned in her somatic therapy classes. A centered, grounding inhale designed to signal calm maturity. It only made her look like she was trying not to be sarcastic about her own sarcasm. "I'm not here to defend everything," she said. "Good," I replied, because I wasn't planning to prosecute. Just trying to figure out what to do with this partnership, as you call it, now that the guest star has taken over the plot. Stephanie shifted in her seat. It's not a simple answer. I didn't ask for a simple answer, I said. I asked for a real one. You want to keep this going? Fine. But you're going to have to stop treating me like a background character in your wellness novel. She looked down at her tea. That's the Stephanie signal for, I have a speech coming. I leaned back. Let her have the stage. I didn't fall out of love with you, Timothy. I just lost track of myself inside this life. It was like I became invisible in the middle of everything. The routines, the expectations. It felt like being observed, but not seen. Yeah, I said, I know the feeling. It's called marriage. And if you didn't want to be part of it, you could have just told me before you enrolled in advanced intimacy with Owen. Her jaw tightened, but she didn't interrupt. Maybe she was learning. Maybe she finally heard herself from the other side of the table. I'm not proud of how it happened, she said. But I'm not going to be ashamed for needing to feel alive again. I didn't ask you to be ashamed, I replied. I asked you to tell the truth when it mattered. And you didn't. That landed. No twitch. No defense. Just silence. For a few minutes, we sat in it. Not the therapeutic kind of silence she liked to fill with candlelight and hand stones. Just silence. Real, ordinary, paper-thin quiet. And it said everything. So, she said eventually, where does that leave us? It was a good question. One I'd already answered in my head 100 times. I had rehearsed versions of this conversation while doing laundry, replacing the light bulbs, pretending to read while she updated her blog. And every version had one common thread. I couldn't unknow what I knew. I'm not staying, I said. And I'm not asking you to leave either. I just think we've done what we can do here. We built something. It lasted. Then it didn't. No hard feelings. Her eyes widened. That's it. I mean, we could drag it out, I said. We could do 6 months of conscious uncoupling and write essays about our mutual respect. But honestly, I don't have the emotional budget for that. She shook her head. So you're just done? No, I said. I was done the night you published a story about our marriage and renamed me, the partner who kept me small. This is just the paperwork part. Her face fell a little. Not dramatically. Not in a way that demanded sympathy. Just a small crumble. Like someone finally realizing they weren't going to win the argument. Not because they were wrong, but because the other person had stopped keeping score. I don't hate you, I added. I don't even dislike you. You made a choice. I made mine. That's adulthood. And what about the house? She asked. You can have it, I said. I already packed. There's a storage unit across town filled with all my moderately useful belongings and 2 boxes of emotional restraint. Help yourself. She let out a tiny, humorless laugh. You're serious. Always, I said. Except for Tuesdays. On Tuesdays I lie to myself for fun. Stephanie looked away. Look back. I thought you'd want to fight. I did, I said. But then I remembered that fighting is just a long-winded way to feel heard. And I'm already listening to myself now. That's enough. We didn't hug. We didn't shake hands. She said thank you. I said take care. And then I left the tea on the table, still half full, still warm, still untouched in all the ways that mattered. Stephanie posted a goodbye message to her Rooted Souls blog the day after I left. I didn't read it, but someone forwarded it to me, assuming I'd want closure in newsletter form. The title was Cycles and Endings, Honoring the Shifts, which sounded more like a weather report than a conclusion to a marriage. Apparently, she thanked a once-beloved partner for his role in her growth and mentioned a tender parting rooted in conscious realignment. I'd be flattered if I weren't too busy unsubscribing. I moved into a rented duplex on the quieter side of town, the kind of place that comes pre-painted in a color called something like aspiring beige and smells faintly of floor polish and decisions made in a hurry. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't symbolic. It just had working plumbing and a lease that didn't require a conversation about shared growth. The first few days felt strange. Not sad, not even heavy, just flat. Like I'd been running a program in the background for so long, I forgot what my screen looked like without it. There was no more deciphering coded statements about expanding emotional bandwidth or pretending to understand why she needed to spend 2 hours journaling after folding laundry. Suddenly, my evenings were just mine. No guided breathing. No bath ritual playlists. No debate about whether the couch disrupted her energy field. I started sleeping better. Maybe it was the silence. Or maybe it was the absence of a person who viewed every dinner conversation as an opportunity to diagnose my inner child. I stopped timing when she came home. I stopped wondering what version of her would walk through the door. The one who wanted to light candles and sit in gratitude, or the one who wanted to ask questions like, when did you first stop being curious about my growth? The answer, by the way, was somewhere around the time she started referring to our anniversary as a calendar-based milestone. People asked how I was doing. I told them the truth, better than I probably should be. That made them uncomfortable. There's a script people expect you to follow when your marriage ends. Something involving soft reflection and long stares out the window. But I didn't have those moments. Mostly, I had a lot of laundry, mild relief, and a strange sense of adult calm that came from no longer living inside a self-help novel with footnotes. I went back to work like nothing happened. Because, in the real world, things keep going. My coworker Barry, who once said he could spot a crumbling marriage by the way someone closes a file cabinet, gave me a nod of approval when I showed up looking vaguely refreshed. That was the only conversation we had about it, and frankly, that was enough. Stephanie texted me 2 weeks later. A single sentence. Do you want to meet for closure? I stared at the screen like she'd offered me a Groupon for regret. I typed a few drafts of replies before landing on. I think we already had that. You just didn't notice. She didn't respond. Which, honestly, felt like the healthiest choice either of us had made in months. The truth is, I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't sad either. There was no emotional orchestra playing in the background. It wasn't tragic. It wasn't profound. It was just a story that ended where it needed to. Some people get married. Some people get movement therapy with Owen. Life's funny like that. There were moments, sure, where I remembered things. Not the highlights or the romantic stuff. No slow dances or beach walks. Because, frankly, we never did that. I remembered the weird stuff. Like the way she used to reorganize the bookshelf every time she was stressed. Or how she could never park straight on the first try, but would argue that the car was just in alignment with a freer geometry. Or the way she believed the toaster was haunted because it once popped up bread at the wrong setting. Those memories didn't sting. They didn't glow either. They just existed, like background noise from a building you used to live in. Someone else's playlist, still faintly audible. I saw her once at the community center about a month after I moved out. She was setting up chairs for what looked like a class, something called grounded dialogue, a safe container for emergent connection. The sign was hand-painted. There were tea lights involved. She didn't notice me. Or if she did, she pretended not to. I didn't wave. I didn't linger. I just kept walking, mildly grateful I hadn't worn the hoodie she used to call a symbol of passive resistance. There's no punchline to all this. No karmic twist. Owen didn't vanish. Stephanie didn't come crawling back with a ukulele and an apology letter. I didn't write a book or grow a beard or take up woodworking. I didn't find myself in the forest or start meditating in a beanbag chair. I got up, went to work, made dinner, watched documentaries about shipwrecks, and paid my bills. Turns out, life goes on without a plot twist. But if you're asking what I learned that being quiet doesn't mean you're being patient. It just means you're waiting for something that may never show up. I learned that pretending to understand someone doesn't count as understanding them. I learned that alignment is a word people use when they want to avoid saying, I changed and didn't tell you. And I learned that you can spend years living with someone and still not realize they've quietly turned your marriage into a focus group for their next identity. But more than anything, I learned that you don't need to explode to leave. You can just pack. You can just go. You can wish them well, hope their kombucha starter finally ferments, and then get back to the business of being a person. So that's what I did. No ceremony. No declarations. No framed quote on the wall that says, still I rise. Just a man, a new lease, a box of mismatched chords, and a surprising amount of peace. And honestly, that's more than enough. Thanks for watching. Rate the story in the comments. Subscribe to the channel